Well, I appreciate you coming on. I'd seen some of your work before, and you're hitting on a point that I've struggled with, which is a lot of respect for Catholics. I know a lot of people in the right wing are very devout Catholics, and yet when you go to the southern border, the charities bringing people across are all Catholic. And and a lot of what the Vatican gets up to. How do you justify the Catholicism that you see from your friends and family versus the activities of the church-sanctioned NGOs and things like that? Tell us, how'd you get started in this, and what is ChurchMilitant.com all about?
Well, first of all, that's a great question. How do you differentiate between these two? Because they do. One is Catholicism itself, teachings of the church, all of the theology and doctrine and liturgy and all of that. That's what we're about here at Church Militant and have been since the very beginning, going on 18 years ago. Unfortunately, just like in every major institution of Western civilization, these Marxist bastards have come in and penetrated and infiltrated and done enough work to destabilize it and begin to take the institutions, not the holdings of them, but the institutions themselves, and begin to flip them so that they can begin to destroy whatever it is that that particular institution does. Now, we see this in education, we see it in politics, we see it in the legal process, in the courts, all of it. So it shouldn't be a surprise that you also have elements of this inside, not just the Catholic Church, but all religions. I mean, one of the things that people don't necessarily quite get is the idea of the religious left. There's no such thing as the religious left. Religion is aimed at the truth. And is there a God? Is there not? If there is, how are we supposed to correspond our lives to him? What is religion? Blah, 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 all of that stuff that is very theological and philosophical. But in the political world, in the day-to-day world, on Main Street, the infiltrators have come in and they have created this idea that there's like a religious right and a religious left. The religious left are Marxists. That's what they are, under the cover of religion. So they take anybody of your audience who's familiar with, even passingly familiar with Christianity, let's just easily present it this way. The greatest commandment is love God. The second commandment is love your neighbor. What they have done is obfuscate those, flip them around so that people now think that loving your neighbor is more important than loving God. They haven't, it's true, obviously, you have to love your neighbor, but they use this as a means to be able to push social justice as sort of a brilliant way of loving God. It isn't. Social justice and the idea of all this social justice thing, certainly here in America and certainly within the Catholic Church, certain leaders in the Catholic Church, was really initiated by Saul Alinsky. It's a perversion of Catholic teaching, just like the left perverts in the political realm the Constitution, right. Like the left perverted, the idea of the right to privacy somehow becomes the right to slaughter, 80 million children in the womb. And, so they take a kernel of the truth, they flip it around, and then they push their agenda and they use it under the guise of whatever institution they've corrupted, in this case, religion. There's no such thing as the religious left. They're Marxists. So when we're talking about, battling them, that's what we're battling. They're no more religious than the communist Chinese. Matter of fact, the communist Chinese may be a little bit more religious than this crowd. So when you run into people that are like Nancy Pelosi in the Catholic sphere, Nancy Pelosi, John Kerry, Joe Biden, all the rest of them, those people, they're baptized Catholic, and that's where it ends. But like other clerics and bishops in Catholicism, in the Catholic Church, leaders of it, notoriety, people with great notoriety, people who are influencers, when they talk, it's like, ooh, we have to listen to them. Those people are not Catholic in any meaningful sense of the word. They're not authentically Catholic. They don't believe what the church teaches. They believe that the institution of the church is something that they can simply take over so that they can use it for their agenda, which is the promotion of Marxism, and which is communism. That's it. And they have co-opted these certain aspects of Christianity. Catholicism, obviously, that's what we deal with specifically, but you see this across the board, the broad board of Christianity in general. Christianity Today, for example, that magazine, that's no more Christian than, the Satanic Bible. They push a certain agenda, a liberal view of religion. There's no liberal or conservative view of religion. Religion is true in and of itself. It's the worship of God as God wants to be worshiped, and that's the end of it. And then how you live your life according, with your neighbor and God, and obviously the obvious stuff that we believe when it comes to religion. Right. But the big deal here that we're having this press conference about on Thursday in D.C. is to say, okay, that's a philosophical sort of thing. It's a historical, political thing. But the religious left has been sucking billions of dollars of U.S. taxpayer dollars, with the Catholic Bishops' Conference leading the way in terms of the most money. And then that money gets spent. Most recently, we're going to highlight the disaster at the border. The U.S. bishops, under the title of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, which is nothing more than a lobbying agency for them, collects hundreds of millions of dollars in U.S. taxpayer dollars, and then is not accountable to report how they spend that money at all. Because they're a church, which they aren't. The USCCB is not a church. It's not a part of the Catholic Church. It has nothing to do with Catholicism at all. Yet, when the bishops registered it as a nonprofit, they registered it under the church so that they can enjoy all the benefits of separation of church and state, meaning they don't have to report anything. They don't have to report they don't have to make their 990s, which is essentially the tax form that you file if you're a nonprofit. They don't have to report that publicly. So you do see, because you see on the government side of the payout, tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars going to the bishop. So they report that on their audit. And that's the end of it. Where that money goes after that, we have no idea. We do know from a number of trips we've taken to the southern border, McAllen, Texas last year, for example, that the people who are fighting against illegal immigration down there, the individuals who are fighting, every single one of them we spoke with, Catholic and Protestant alike, point the fingers at Catholic Charities and say, that is the illegal immigrants travel agency. So these flights, for example, that happened, that take off from Texas and or anywhere along the southern border, and all of a sudden find their way on these midnight flights into White Plains, New York, for example, into Westchester County, and then from there they land. And these are midnight flights. These airports are closed.
Right, and a lot of these are Catholic charities. Just tell us again. So it's on Thursday, 2 days from now, at the National Press Club. You're doing a press conference with the Deposit of Faith Coalition, and that's going to be about this topic, specifically the southern border and the Catholic Church.
It'll be about how they're using government money to essentially destabilize America. American values, American, understanding of our, who we are as a country.
And then, of course, I imagine really they'll use this as an excuse to remove the tax exemption from all churches, saying, well, let's just get rid of the whole thing. It's a devious ploy. It really reminds me of Jim Jones more than anything else, a communist who realized the best way to destroy the church was to infiltrate it and turn it to his own ends. Yep. More on the other side with Michael Voris. Don't go anywhere, folks. All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is the American Journal. I'm your host, Harrison Smith. My guest is Michael Voris, Catholic reformer. His website is ChurchMilitant.com. And he'll be hosting a press conference at the National Press Club on Thursday, July 20th of this year with the Deposit of Faith Coalition. And we'll talk about what the task that they are taking on. But just to lay the groundwork a little bit, I mean, for decades, America's always a Protestant country, but Catholics always serve this sort of outsized influence in keeping America culturally pure. I don't know how you'd put it, but in terms of like the Hays Code and keeping filth off the movie screens and keeping curse words off the radio. I mean, it was Catholic organizations that really led that charge and had a lot of power in this country that they used to keep it decent and moral and upright in a Christian sense. And yet now you look at the Catholic Church and you look at the Pope, he's practically waving a rainbow flag and gallivanting around the globe talking about climate change and global warming. I mean, what has happened to the Catholic Church? And is this change coming from on high? Is it coming from the Pope and the Vatican on down? Or is it coming from the lay people that are just liberals and yet continue to call themselves Catholics?
That's a very good question, and certainly worth exploring. Yes, this is all top down, but the reason it hasn't really met any resistance to speak of, any great force of resistance, is because the top-down element in the 60s and the 70s was very successful in psyching Catholics up to just think that all of this was fine. They penetrated them, and I want to call them what they are. They're communist forces, they're Marxist forces, Freemason, actually, Freemasonic forces within the church who managed to get hold of some of the levers of power in key positions, and little by little, in this parish, in that diocese, in this archdiocese, in that seminary, in this religious order, began turning the battleship around. And when they did that, Catholics, for the most part, just simply went along with it, because why would they suspect, why would just a normal good Catholic suspect that, the archbishop or the cardinal of his diocese is actually plotting against the faith? So you talk about sort of a Johnny come lately, to that realization, and it's a hard concept. That's a really hard mountain to climb if you're a Catholic, to think, wait a minute, this fellow who is the shepherd, I'm giving a bishop, for example, in a diocese, or an archbishop in an archdiocese, that this fellow who has been appointed by the Pope to, secure the faith and help promote the salvation of souls and everything here, is actually a Judas. And that's a really hard thing to get your brain around. But when you get your brain around it, all the lights go on and everything makes sense. Everything makes sense. The bishops, for example, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, which was formed in 1966 by the Cardinal Archbishop of the diocese we're in right here, Detroit, Archdiocese of Detroit, Cardinal John Dearden, formed the USC, at the time it was the NCCB, whatever an acronym was at the time. They changed the name about 2000, 2002, same organization. Set about to first kind of destabilize the church theologically and liturgically. And then once that had begun the process, and Catholics are just, well, this is kind of different. Remember, this is the 1960s. Everything's changing.
Right.
Everything's changing. Civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, women's lib, the sexual revolution, everything is changing. So it didn't strike those Catholics as of the time as being, it just all seemed like it all fit together. We're changing, or, Kennedy's in the White House, we're going to the moon. I mean, it's a whole new era. So the fact that everything is changing doesn't really set off any alarm bells, certainly not on a broad base with Catholics. By the time you get to the 70s and the 80s, now what's happened is the Catholic school system has been invaded by these guys, taken over, people who are opposed to the faith. And that's the point. Bishops and priests who do not believe the faith. They won't say it publicly, obviously, they blow their cover. But they're undermining the faith, and what they do then is they produce a couple generations of Catholics who just don't know the faith at all.
Right.
So when you have these horrible rogue priests and these horrible rogue bishops that come around and start telling you, oh, social justice is what's important. Oh, we have to blow up the borders. Oh, you shouldn't have guns. Oh, climate change is a real thing. When you start hearing that, well, you're talking to, the people in the pews and in Catholic schools who've been conditioned to hear this for 30 or 40 years. So they're willing to accept it simply because it goes along with everything they've been malformed in.
Right.
It makes sense. It's only this smaller group of Catholics who are well-schooled in the faith who are saying, wait a minute, everything you are saying is complete bull.
Yeah.
That's not true.
Yeah.
And then you start examining it, and that's where you begin to say, you know what, it's our duty now to pull together here and fight back against this.
Yeah, try to get the church back on the right track. Now, obviously, this phenomenon is not unique to the Catholic Church, but the unique part about the Catholic Church is the odd dichotomy that, again, we were discussing earlier, where it's like you've got the FBI having Catholic organizations and Catholic churches on their terror watch list as they, rush in and surveil them and try to claim that they're some sort of domestic terror threat, while simultaneously the church, again, is operating the open borders, as you put it, travel agency, which I think is very apt. I mean, it's
a good name. So
there's a uniqueness about the Catholic situation. Of course, I'm to do with the hierarchy and the Pope and the Vatican being a unique church-state structure. And so what are you hoping to do? Again, you're giving this press conference on this Thursday at the National Press Club in D.C. with the Deposit of Faith Coalition. What is the Deposit of Faith Coalition, and what are you guys hoping to achieve?
It's about 10 groups. Obviously, Church Militant is one of them. And we are banding together and saying, let's alert the politically conservative secular media about what's going on here. And the what's going on is that the country, the republic, is being destabilized and has been for decades now. But it gets worse every year, as we can see. I mean, just look at the numbers of illegals coming across the border in the last 2 years, and then just trace it back.
Right.
And we need to draw people's attention to this. We want the politically conservative media that the bishops do not control. Look, the American Catholic media is largely controlled by the U.S. bishops. They're essentially their stenographers. I can guarantee, we've got a dozen or whatever it is already coming to this, then some people joining in, some media outlets joining in virtually to start doing this story. I will guarantee you not one Catholic media organization will pick up this story besides those inside the coalition, obviously.
Very interesting.
But none of the bishops' groups, they won't cover it, they won't talk about it. And what are we saying? I mean, this isn't a headline if you're a Catholic media that a coalition of groups representing millions of Catholics in terms of subscribers and viewers and the recipients of their newsletters and everything else, millions of Catholics are challenging that you should not be receiving government money at all. That's not a story in the Catholic world. Well, it's not, because the Catholic bishops control that Catholic
but it
media.
absolutely should be.
Payroll.
ChurchMilitant.com. Michael Voris, thank you so much for coming on. It's about time something's done about this strange dichotomy within the Catholic Church.